East Palestine, Ohio. I just got back from the massive chemical spill there that reeked of a cover-up, and I want to share with you what I learned on today's episode. Be sure to visit my website, www.saraacarter.com. That's saraacarter.com for the latest reporting and stories. And folks, while you're there, please be sure to subscribe for our email list so that we can stay in touch. It's just that important. We've seen over the last year, right? What have we seen? We've seen the fact that a lot of conservatives have been shadow banned. And I have a very, very special guest on today's show that is going to talk about the facts behind the disinformation campaigns that have been coming out of our bureaucracy. But back to East Palestine, our trains are falling off the tracks. Air travel is a nightmare. And our roads and bridges are crumbling in disrepair. What is the response for the Biden administration and Pete Buttigieg? Crickets, literally crickets, complaining about how there are too many white construction workers. Are they serious? Is this really happening in America where we have these massive, massive issues and crises, and we have trains falling off the tracks and plastic manufacturing, warehouses exploding, and all kinds of craziness happening with our transportation. And this is what he's worried about. He's worried about white construction workers. We need to hold these people accountable. And on today's show, I will take you inside the crisis in Ohio and what I saw in my recent visit. Today, I'm also going to be joined, and I teased him a little bit at the top, by Gabe Kaminsky. He is a rising superstar in investigative journalism, folks, rising superstar. And he is with the Washington Examiner. And we'll be discussing his investigative reporting that he has totally blown open. And he's blown the cover off the U.S. government-backed group that set out to censor and defund conservatives. And it did that. It is a very scary story, but Gabe has some good news to share with us today, and I can't wait for you to hear it. Thank God for investigative journalists. I'll also cover what an MSNBC guest said about Nikki Haley and why the radical left is incensed about her candidacy. It's just insane. Wait till you hear it. You will not believe it. You will not believe what this guy said. I mean, you can't even get more racist than what he said about Nikki Haley. Folks, be sure to visit saraacarter.com. That is saraacarter.com for my latest show links and articles. And while you're there, sign up for our email list so that you don't get shadow banned. Folks, we have a new and great sponsor for this show, and I'm sure you've seen it on my website, saraacarter.com, but it is Allegiance Gold. Allegiance Gold. Gold and silver actually allow you to protect what you have worked so hard for. And they give you back that control and the privacy that you need. And we all saw what was happening in Canada. We've seen what has happened inside the United States. We've seen how the banks, so many of them, are owned by these political woke groups and by our lawmakers. I mean, it's like they don't even care about the money you're putting in the bank anymore, folks. They want to control you. But they can't do that with gold and silver. And right now, with Allegiance Gold, you can get $5,000 of free silver on a qualifying purchase when you tell them that Sara sent you. This is very important. Tell them Sara sent you. My friends at Allegiance Gold can help you protect your IRA or 401k with actual physical gold and silver, or have it delivered securely right to your door. Isn't that incredible? They will educate you on the benefits of physical gold because they care and want to build a long-term relationship with you. So get $5,000 of free silver on a qualifying purchase when you tell them that Sara sent you. So don't wait. Call or click today. 877-702-7272. That's 877-702-SARA, S-A-R-A. Or go to Protect with Sara. That's protectwithsara.com. We can't control the Biden administration, but we can prepare. That's 877-702-7272. That's 877-702-SARA or protectwithsara.com. So as you all know, those of you who watch Fox News, Sean Hannity, I just returned from my trip to East Palestine, Ohio, and I was mortified at how the people from this community were actually treated by the Biden administration and even by some of their own local, lawmakers like Governor DeWine. I mean, in the beginning, it was just crazy. It's crazy. You have this massive, we don't even know now if it should have happened, controlled explosion of toxic chemicals over this wonderful community. And I mean, I could still, and it was almost 2 weeks right after this. It was February 3rd was the train derailment. For those of you that aren't following up on the news, I know a lot of us are busy. Podcasting sometimes is a fun way of catching up on things and listening. Yeah, between you and I having a moment to kind of reflect back on the week. So for those of you that don't know, on February 3rd, Norfolk Southern Railroad had a massive train derailment. 50 cars derailed off the train tracks. There was 141 cars in this group. And the trains literally they were carrying toxic chemicals, one of them being vinyl chloride and the other ones I can't even pronounce. They were just crazy big, long names. These chemicals are very toxic, very dangerous. There was a long burn happening on the tracks, especially with the vinyl chloride train cars. And the train company, nobody is actually quite sure about this, though. Let me just be very clear of who decided to do the control burn. So hazmat teams came out. I spoke to some of the first responders that arrived on the scene. They didn't even have any idea what was in the carts. That's how insane this is. They were the first ones on the scene, the hazmat teams from the area right there near East Palestine. They show up with the fire department. They see these, the fires just racing through the train carts. You have homes, like literally, like maybe 100 feet, 200 feet away from the train carts, because I was standing right there at ground zero and talking to some of the residents that watched this happen. And then you have the hazmat teams arrive. And there's a smell of chemicals in the air. Everybody described it as like a sweet, chlorinated smell. Your eyes are watering. Your throat hurts. And by the way, since I got back from there, I have not been feeling great. I could have just gotten something, because I'm traveling all over the place. Certainly it is not COVID, though. I don't have that. But I could smell it in the air while I was down there. They were actually trying to dump gravel over the contaminated soil, guys, in people's yards. I couldn't believe it. They were like, just dump. They weren't taking out the soil. In fact, the people that I talked to, the residents that were there, were telling me, as you can see, I'm still getting over it. The residents there were telling me that nobody had come to their home to test the soil. Nobody had come to their home to test the house. Now, they may have since I've been there. But at that point in time, the residents that I spoke with, that is what they said. The fish in the river behind their house, dying. And by the way, 2 miles down the stream bed, it's a stream, not so much a river, but a stream that actually ends up feeding into the Ohio River. But the stream, even 2 miles down, I was videotaping the fish that were dead in the water, the frogs, the crawfish. I didn't see one little critter alive in that stream while I was there. If things have changed in the last 3 or 4 days, fine. Would I drink that water out of wells out there? No way. Would I even trust the water in the system? No way, not right now. I know because I've covered stories and I've seen how the government lies. And a lot of times we don't even find out till 15 years down the road, 20 years down the road. Oh, we had no idea there was this contamination. Or all of a sudden there's cancer clusters, right? And these people are supposed to believe their government. Look at what happened even in Ohio under COVID. And I remember being there. And Governor DeWine, I mean, a lot of Republicans were very upset with how he handled it. Because he was just like, for a long time, right on board with the Democrats. I mean, stringent policies in Ohio. And this is what's so stunning, right? Let me just cover this really quick. Because Steve Hilton and I talked about this on the show on Sunday. They're like, go ahead, drink the water. This is like less than 2 weeks. You can literally see the chemicals when you drop rocks into the stream. You can literally see the chemicals float on top. You see the dead animal life. There were other animals that died in the area from the chloride in the air, and God only knows what else. They were smaller animals, the foxes, some of the chickens. You know, these are people with children who live paycheck to paycheck. The government wants them to be triple boosted for COVID when the chances of their kids, come on, let's be honest. Now the truth has come out about COVID, right? But the chances of their children actually, succumbing to COVID were like nil, almost nil. But they locked our children down in the houses. They were like, oh my gosh, COVID, we've got to do everything. We're going to wear masks. We can't go to the grocery store unless we're masked up. We can't walk near each other, 6 feet of separation. To hell with the science, to hell with the science. But here in East Palestine, they want you to drink the water after we watch like a little atomic explosion occur with vinyl chloride and all of these other chemicals that we cannot pronounce that have literally killed animals in that area that are probably infecting us and the residents there. And they want us to go ahead and drink the water and everything's going to be okay. And you only need to evacuate if you're like a mile, then 2 miles, then 5 miles. Oh, we made a mistake. They don't even know what they're talking about. The hazmat team arrives there. They don't even know what they're dealing with. They told me we were just lucky. And then Governor DeWine says, hey, guess what? Don't worry. Don't worry about it. We're all good. But in the beginning, he's like, yeah, FEMA doesn't need to show up here. Guess what? Governor DeWine got $40,000 in donations from Norfolk Southern Railroad and people connected to Norfolk Southern Railroad, his political campaign. What do you think this guy's going to do? These railroad companies and their lobbyists, they own politicians, they own lawmakers. Do you know that railroad was up and running within 2 days of that horrible incident? The railroad was more worried about getting back on track, literally, and the money they were losing than the people that were living right around that incident, ground zero. Not one person came to any of those residents and said, hey, I am so sorry. What can we do to help you? Let's clean your whole house. Let's take tests. Let's move you out. You know what they gave them? $1,000 inconvenience check. Really? Well, they've got something else coming because there are going to be lawyers down there. We've got, Aaron Brockovich, of course, famous lawyer, environmentalist, going to be heading down there next week. And by the way, we're all the environmentalists. We're all the Greenpeace folks. Where are they at? Where are the Biden administration environmentalists? The ones that don't want us flying on airplanes, but have their own private jets. Do you not see the hypocrisy? I mean, are you as frustrated as I am? I'm beyond livid with this. We cannot ignore what is happening in our country. My gosh, we are, our president is in Kyiv, is in Ukraine, traveled all the way down there, couldn't even bother to stop. In East Palestine, these wonderful families that are left out there. And by the way, the CEO of Norfolk Southern literally said the reason he did not send people from his company to East Palestine to the town hall meeting that I was at is because he was afraid for their safety from the people of the town. Really? These are people that literally were there picking up diapers. These are hardworking Americans getting handouts of food because they can't go back in their homes, some of them, because they're terrified of going back in their homes. I don't blame them. I would not drink the water out of the well. They even said, oh, well, you could drink the water, city water, but the well water, why don't you wait till it gets tested? Well, how are they supposed to shower, folks? How are they supposed to, get water to their children? Right? They're going to be buying bottles of water. We're going to buy bottles of water to shower with. These people that run these, our government and our swamp creatures, and it's so sad, but it's not all of corporations, but some of them, they have no common sense, no common decency, no common morality. How do you even do that and not say, I'm sorry? I don't get it. I want to play this clip too, because I think it's important we hear from our Secretary of Transportation, such a brilliant, insightful man, Pete Buttigieg, who cares so much about the American people and our failing infrastructure in the United States.
To work with your contractors, to work with your community colleges on building a workforce that reflects the community. We have heard way too many stories from generations past of infrastructure where you got a neighborhood, often a neighborhood of color, that finally sees the project come to them, but everyone in the hard hats on that project looking like, doing the good paying jobs, don't look like they came from anywhere near the neighborhood.
Right.
You can build community wealth that will help close wealth gaps in this country if we can tear down those barriers. But that happens at the delivery level.
What a piece of work, right? I mean, I want you to think about what he is saying there too. Like, they don't reflect the look of the community. First of all, that just sounds ridiculous to me. Because just because you're a person of color does not necessarily mean that you don't have anything. I mean, that's racist in itself, or that your community is falling apart. Or maybe, you know what? Maybe it's because of Democrat policies, right? Maybe Pete Buttigieg needs to take an internal look at himself and the party that he represents, that keeps communities from growing, that stops small businesses from growing, that inhibits our law enforcement officials, right, from doing their job in these communities, from protecting the people in every community, whether you're white, black, Hispanic, Asian, I don't care. I grew up for a good period of my life in an underprivileged community. My father died. I came back from Saudi Arabia. I lived in a poor community. My mom worked in a factory. My life totally changed, completely upside down, right? But guess what? I lived in an amazing community too. We wanted law enforcement there. We wanted the gangs to stop. We didn't want those Hispanic gangs running our community or stealing our cars in front of our house, which, by the way, they tried to do a couple of times. I even remember an incident where a child lost his life. He was shot and killed right around the corner from my house on Ramona Avenue. I remember that. It was on Ramona Avenue, and people walked by that yard all day long because the grass was so high they didn't see the 15-year-old kid lying dead in the grass. But you want to know what allows the communities in our country, especially those that are run by Democrats and DAs and all this, Pete Buttigieg, to fall into shit, and our children to suffer, and moms walking their kids, like I saw in Philadelphia, over heroin addicts that were literally like zombies on the street, needles all over the place, is Democrat policies. And going back to East Palestine, what about those residents? What about those people whose community has been turned upside down now? Where are you? You're more worried about some kind of equitable look of the construction workers? How do you know some of those construction workers aren't immigrants that have come here from Europe and other places in the world, or Mexico, where you think everybody who comes from Mexico or Cuba or, Central America has to look a certain way, quote unquote? or that everybody who has African blood, like me, has to look a certain way, quote unquote? Are we all just assuming right now, making assumptions about everything, folks? We have an administration that literally has checked out. They are MIA. They do not care. And for that reason, and that reason alone, that is the reason why I say don't trust what they're telling you right now. Get outside help, people of East Palestine. Take my advice on this. Get Erin Brockovich. She'll get the people from the universities to run tests on the soil, tests on the water. Make sure they pay you to the full extent of what they owe you. And if your house is no longer habitable because you had a train in your backyard that was spewing out vinyl chloride and your children are in that house, tell the railroad company and tell the government that you don't want to live there anymore. That's their responsibility. You're the victim here. They aren't. You are the victims. They aren't. And you are the survivors. And fight back, because you will survive this. You will get what you need if you all stick together and stand up against this MIA administration and what happened with this railroad. I truly, truly believe that. For my latest videos and deep dives into the stories you care about, subscribe to my channel here on YouTube and leave a comment down below. Thank you. We're going to be with Gabe Kaminsky in just a minute, but there's somebody I want to talk to you about, somebody that does care about America, somebody that does care about American ingenuity and American products, and probably would give my pillows to the people of East Palestine. Just kidding. Throw it there. But who does truly care about Americans and American products. That is Mike Lindell with My Pillow. Mike Lindell is a true American hero. And right now, he has a special offer for all of you, the Sara Carter Show listeners. And it is a buy one, get one free on My Pillow 2.0. All you have to do is use the promo code Carter, CARTER. That's use the promo code Carter. Brand new temperature regulating technology will keep you comfortable throughout the night, folks. You can't imagine what a great pillow this is. It actually helped me get the sleep I needed last night. And for a limited time, when you buy the one My Pillow 2.0, you get another one for free with the code Carter, CARTER. So go to mypillow.com for My Pillow 2.0. Buy one, get one pricing plus discounts on your favorite My Pillow products like towels, sheets, slippers, and more by using code Carter. Stay cool and sleep better with the My Pillow 2.0 buy one, get one free sale going on now at mypillow.com, promo code Carter. Mypillow.com, promo code Carter. I'm happy to bring on Gabe Kaminsky. He's the investigative reporter at the Washington Examiner, where I once worked. That was once my home base, who broke these amazing stories over the last month called Disinformation Inc. It was an exclusive series of stories that exposed what the State Department was doing. It was a State Department-backed group that, and now the big story is, Gabe, that they cut ties with a group, the State Department did, that was blacklisting conservative news media. Thank you for being on the show, and thank you for all the great work that you're doing.
Yeah, thank you very much for having me. Like you said, the big news that we had broke today, and a few other outlets had also published, is that the National Endowment for Democracy, a nonprofit group funded almost entirely through congressional appropriations, announced that it will, to us and a few other outlets, that it will no longer be providing in the future financial resources grants to the Global Disinformation Index, which has been secretly compiling blacklists of conservative media outlets and feeding those to advertising companies. And so the National Endowment for Democracy received $300 million in taxpayer dollars in 2021.
And let's talk about that, because here in your story, you said through these congressional appropriations, they granted the National Endowment for Democracy between 2020 and 2021 $544,750 to this Global Disinformation Index, which basically is a leftist organization that was targeting conservative news media. This is astonishing. This is astonishing that this is happening, and it was happening under our noses. And by the way, I mean, I was a recipient of some of the State Department's monitoring of social media, and that was the former ambassador to Ukraine. She had been monitoring with people at the State Department, and Judicial Watch broke that story. My social media, Sean Hannity's social media, Dan Bongino's social media, anybody, John Solomon's social media, anybody who is actually working on stories regarding Ukraine. This was years ago at the time. She was ensuring that we were being monitored, and that was using State Department personnel to do that. So obviously it was State Department funding that helped with that. Your story, I think, is astonishing because it's the amount of money that was being granted to this group to not only monitor conservative media, but to basically, disengage from that media. Explain to the audience how they would target conservative news media through this group, through the Global Disinformation Index.
Yeah, and the other thing I would just note on funding is that the funds from the National Endowment for Democracy actually don't account for all of the funding through state. The State Department's Global Engagement Center gave $100,000 to the Global Disinformation Index too, and I haven't heard from that group on whether it will provide future grants to GDI. And so GDI, basically we learned about a month ago, and we published this story about a little more than a week ago, about how the Global Disinformation Index they operate this item called a dynamic exclusion list. And essentially it's a blacklist of websites that they determine to be the biggest peddlers of purported disinformation on the internet. And not shockingly, all those websites are conservative outlets.
So was the Washington Examiner on that site too, right? I mean, it was also included?
That's right. The Washington Examiner, we learned we are on the blacklist. And I'll get into a little bit of what that means. Other outlets that we learned, Breitbart News is on that blacklist. And separately, the Global Disinformation Index has said that the 10 riskiest outlets are places like the New York Post, Real Clear Politics, The Blaze, The Daily Wire, the American Spectator, which publishes a lot of opinion content, which certainly raises questions about how they're defining disinformation on the internet. And so this blacklist, they're feeding to advertising companies with the intent of trying to get these websites to lose out on advertising dollars. And so, for example, one group that the GDI has been feeding this blacklist to, they're actively feeding it to other groups as well currently, is the Microsoft-owned Xander, Xandr.
Yeah, I was going to ask you about that because the Xander group plays right into this, right?
That's right. Xander was purchased, AT&T formerly owned Xander, and Microsoft purchased Xander from AT&T in 2021 for $1 billion. And Xander places ads on behalf of major American companies in the neighborhood of Walmart, Comcast, and major corporations. And so Xander previously subscribed to the Global Disinformation Index's dynamic exclusion list, which essentially means that they abided by the suggestions of not placing ads in conservative media outlets. A couple sources in the advertising industry shortly after our first story leaked us Xander's own blacklist. And that essentially labeled major conservative outlets like Town Hall as, for example, reprehensible and offensive. It labeled other outlets as false and misleading, including the Washington Examiner, and some outlets as hate speech in the case of Breitbart.tv, which is a defunct domain, video domain through Breitbart. Shortly after that story.
Did they have MSNBC on that list? I was just wondering because they were calling Nikki Haley like a brown Karen and stuff today. So I'm like wondering if that is considered news. I'm just throwing that out there as being facetious because it's very interesting how they selectively decide who gets on these lists and what connotates news.
No, that's right, Sarah. And what I would note is that MSNBC is not on that list. What I would note is that the Global Disinformation Index says that the 10 least riskiest outlets are Huffington Post, BuzzFeed News, and places like the Washington Post. I wanted to highlight Huffington Post and BuzzFeed News because BuzzFeed News notably published the Steele dossier, a piece of opposition research that the Hillary Clinton campaign fed to the FBI in order to link Donald Trump to falsely link Donald Trump to the Russian government. That was a huge disinformation story, and they're apparently one of the least riskiest.
Absolutely. That was a story that I spent years of my career at the beginning of Trump's presidency breaking with John Solomon. And the Steele dossier was a bunch of lies that was actually fed to these various news outlets by some people in our own bureaucracy. So this is where I go back to the State Department, right? So here's the issue, Gabe, right? All these years covering these stories, people will come up to me and say, look, you broke all these stories. Now Gabe Kaminsky is breaking all these incredibly important stories, exposing what's going on, stopping these companies from lying to the American public or taking away the ability, for example, of the Washington Examiner to have advertising or, I would say even down to the insurance that covers our websites and stuff. I mean, if we're on these lists, then all of a sudden an insurance company is like, hey, you're too risky. You know what I mean? You won't be able to get covered. This is about business as well. But here we have these lies being perpetrated by these groups, but we have a bureaucracy that is utilizing these groups to perpetrate those lies. So who is it that holds them accountable? And I talk about this quite often on the show. When people come up to me and say, yeah, you guys broke all those stories, but nobody served time, nobody was held accountable. The buck stops at the Department of Justice. The buck stops within our government at the executive level. But if nobody's willing to do anything, how do you respond as a journalist? I know how I do. When people say, but who's going to pay the price for all of this now that we've exposed this, Because I'm sure all of this was happening during the election. Right? During the election cycle.
That's right. And that's right. And in terms of, holding power accountable here, obviously, we're continuing to follow the story. But another piece of this is in terms of us communicating with lawmakers and providing them this information. And, in the past several days, some lawmakers that have raised concerns over this include Matt Gaetz and Jim Jordan, who are both on the weaponization subcommittee in Congress, and both of them said that they intend to investigate the State Department funding. A few other lawmakers we've talked with include Representative James Comer, the chairman of the House Oversight Committee. And so, certainly lawmakers have raised concerns over this issue in recent days, and absolutely, we intend to keep following up with them to get more clarity on the sort of investigations that they think this could sort of take place in, whether that be in the Weaponization Committee, the Oversight Committee, certainly the House Foreign Affairs Committee, which oversees State Department grants. And Chairman Michael McCall of that committee has taken issue with some of that State Department funding. And I know, for example, in our story that we published today, we had learned that on Thursday through a source that the National Endowment for Democracy, prior to severing its financial relationship with the Global Disinformation Index, actually briefed the House Foreign Affairs Committee on this because they had requested it and had that discussion about why they were providing grants to this kind of group.
Did you get any clarity onto why the State Department felt that it was okay to provide that funding to this group? I mean, considering it would probably be pretty obvious that the group was skewed in one direction. Did anybody answer any of those questions? Or are you hoping to get those answers when Congress holds those hearings?
The NED has been under the impression that because their grants were earmarked for foreign, so National Endowment for Democracy's grants to GDI were earmarked for developing risk ratings for advertisers in foreign countries, places like Africa, Latin America, and the Caribbean. So their understanding as well, we fund a Global Disinformation Index for its foreign activity because we are focused on foreign affairs and not domestic affairs, per their statement that we had published. today. That being said, I think a lot of Republicans and lawyers take issue with that statement because, look, they argue money is fungible. And in and of itself, by providing resources to a group that is taking steps to censor the press in America, I mean,
right.
It clearly is obviously problematic. And it appears that they recognize that by seeking to distance themselves from GDI.
Right, exactly. And I'm with those questions that are rising in my mind now as to why they were allowing them to be funded. Look, there's oversight. We know that. I've seen this happen before in other cases, not just, with funding groups like this that appear to be and are later found out to be very leftist, but with other issues that we've seen come up at the State Department. Money that goes into a black hole that funds research at Wuhan laboratories, or, it ends up in the pocket of somebody in Pakistan. And we find out later because there's no real oversight here. I mean, I'm wondering, let me ask you this. How long was the State Department moving money? How long were they being funded, this group, GDI?
So National Endowment for Democracy's grants, and that's a State Department-backed group, their grants were in 2020 and 2021. The Global Engagement Center, which is a more direct grant-making body affiliated with the State Department, they gave $100,000 in 2021. And I really do want to stress the Global Engagement Center really has also been coming under fire following our story, because this is not the first case in which they've been involved in controversial initiatives. Matt Taibbi, a journalist who has been publishing the Twitter files, revealed not too long ago in January that the Global Engagement Center in March 2020 and during that year 2020 was coordinating with Twitter to demand they engage in content moderation and censorship related to topics related to COVID-19 and vaccines. And Yoel Roth, Twitter's former trust and safety head, was one of those individuals communicating with the Global Engagement Center. And Twitter, even at one point, according to those documents that Taibbi published, was questioning how much they should be taking lead from the Global Engagement Center. And so certainly this is a State Department entity that has come under fire very recently. And also Michael McCall and other lawmakers have voted to not reauthorize this group based on that in the past. They've said, let's get rid of this group.
This is really important because it goes to what the other areas that you found. It's kind of like tentacles, right? So as an investigative journalist, you see one little piece of it, and then all of a sudden you just can't believe it because another door opens and another tentacle comes out, and you're saying to yourself, wow, could this really be happening? Right under our noses, right before our very eyes. I mean, look, it was happening to the Washington Examiner. You had no idea. Nobody at the Examiner, I'm sure, had any idea. They were on this kind of like blacklist, while MSNBC, BuzzFeed, all these other people, and all these other entities that have definitely produced some pretty erroneous reporting were actually considered, investable, right? For at least in the eyes of the GDI. But now I want to talk to you a little bit about how far that can go when you're looking at the issue of like those tentacles, the Open Society Foundation. Tell me a little bit about what you found there, because I know that was something that you looked at. The Tides Foundation, they're these are all left-wing groups, right? And Drummond Pike, they contributed to this blacklist. Have any of those left-leaning organizations reached out and condemned the censorship of these conservative outlets? Any of them?
They have not. And like you were saying, some other left-leaning nonprofits have contributed grants to the Global Disinformation Index. I'm not aware of to the extent that was for, the domestic blacklisting. I don't think that would be, crazy to assume that more than the State Department. But for example, Open Society Foundations, which is a large grant-making network chaired by philanthropist George Soros, they had granted $150,000 in 2022 to the Global Disinformation Index for general support. We only learned this directly from Open Society Foundations itself, because they actually they haven't publicized this grant yet because it was so recent on their website. but they did confirm that they gave that amount of money. And like you were also saying, the Tides Foundation, which is a very large foundation, very influential in Democratic politics, has contributed to GDI. And so, like you were noting about kind of the tentacles of various funding sources, certainly, that's something that I found shocking going down this rabbit hole, which is that there's money coming in from a lot of different entities. I also note that the British government has contributed millions of dollars to the Global Disinformation Index through the Commonwealth Royal Office. And that certainly raises concerns that the British government could potentially, hypothetically meddling in the American media space.
And you know what? That's actually not surprising, considering the Steele dossier. Considering that we were probably working with the British on this, because Christopher Steele was a retired MI6 spy, and then working very closely with our U.S. intelligence. And as I always say, you are never really former when you're working for the CIA or MI6, or there's always those connections that still exist, and that's the terrifying part, I think, for a lot of Americans, Gabe, and I know for a lot of my listeners. The concern is that we're being played, right? So if the American public cannot be adequately informed of the truth, right, of the facts, even before elections or with regard to issues, then they don't know what's going on. And if groups like this are pulling the strings and trying to shut down, actual investigative journalists and people who are doing their jobs, like we saw with the New York Post and Miranda Devine, then the American public is not going to be informed. And then they can't make an informed decision at the ballot box, right? Or with regards to their health, or with regards to a war overseas. I think that's why your reporting is so important. It's like the most important reporting that anybody could be doing right now, because it is exposing how deep these layers go to control the information flow, not only on a national level, but on a global level. And I mean, I thank you for that. I really do. I thank you for that. How far do you think this can go? I have a feeling you're not going to let this go.
Definitely not letting it go. And I really do appreciate your comments about our reporting. We're really happy it's been able to make an impact so far. But certainly, we think there's a lot more to unpack here, especially with the National Endowment for Democracy having to answer for previously providing hundreds of thousands of dollars to the Global Disinformation Index. And certainly in the case of the Global Engagement Center, which has not been entirely responsive to the money it's given. In terms of how far this could go, I think obviously these stories are very new, and we were just kind of getting off the ground with them. But I think that so far there's been a lot of receptiveness from Congress about this, and it certainly will remain to be seen how much they intend to investigate this or potentially hold hearings. And we definitely intend to keep updating people as we kind of can learn more about how they intend to take actions here.
Yeah, and I think holding their feet to the fire. I mean, it's very important. I know Congress has got a lot on their plate. Now we have, I believe, a little bit better of a balance of power in Washington, D.C., with the House now under the control of the Republicans. And so I hope that they, and I know your stories will hold their feet to the fire. I know that Congressman Matt Gaetz, who's a friend of mine, I know he absolutely will go after this. It's definitely in his interest. And of course, Chairman Jim Jordan, I think this is certainly like at the top of the list for his investigations into the weaponization, which I think is probably, like I said, once again, Gabe, it's the most important story. It's exactly the reason why, we would go on television every single night and say, what is going on here? And why is our bureaucracy so vested, right, in internal politics of the United States? What is going on here? These are supposed to be bureaucrats that are working for us, the American people, the taxpayers. We pay them. So they should be working for us. We shouldn't be working for them. And we need to know the truth about where they're putting our money, what they're funding, and where they're going. Tell everybody where we can see more of your stories, where we can go, how we can follow you on Twitter, because I think you're just at the very beginning of a very, amazing career in journalism and in investigative journalism. I think you're going to just blow this all out of the water. I really do believe that.
Well, thank you very much. You can read our work at WashingtonExaminer.com. We have a tab on our site. The name of our series is Disinformation Inc. And there's a tab on the site, which you can click on that and you can see our stories. You can also follow me on Twitter at Ge Kaminsky, GeKaminsky, where I try to share my stories. So
that's awesome. Thank you so much for being on the Sara Carter Show. You're amazing. I hope you come back on very soon and keep us updated. And we'll keep putting your stories out there too. Go to SaraCarter.com. We'll put links to Gabe's stories. We'll make sure to retweet on all my social media as well as my platforms. I think the American people deserve to know the truth. And I think we're very lucky to have journalists like you out there willing to stand up to this behemoth monster called the DC swamp. It's not easy. It's not easy at all. You've got a lot to dig through to get to the truth.
Thanks for having me. Appreciate it.
Anytime. Wasn't that a great interview with Gabe? We've got to bring him back on this show. I know I got so much out of it. I know you did too. This is why investigative journalism is so important and why we've got to fight for more investigative journalists. It's the only way to hold these folks accountable. Before I get to Nikki Haley, which I know you're going to be as stunned as I am by what MSNBC guest said, and we're going to hold that person accountable on this show here on the Sara Carter Show. I want to tell you about AMAC. You know how much I love AMAC. It's the Association of Mature American Citizens. It is the fastest growing conservative 50+ organization in America. In just a few short years, over 2 million people have joined and now carry an AMAC membership card. How awesome is that? By joining AMAC, you're taking the first steps to saving the America that you love. AMAC offers an alternative to just about every other benefit that ARP offers. But guess what? Without that liberal agenda, I stand with AMAC, and I hope that you will too. I encourage you to join today at amac.us/Carter. That's amac.us/Carter. The benefits of membership are great, but guess what? The cause is even greater. Join today at amac.us/Carter. So I'm going to jump right into this because I just could not believe. I thought Don Lemon was bad. Remember the whole Don Lemon incident, the misogynistic way that he was treating, women and Nikki Haley and basically saying she was past her prime. I could not believe that MSNBC not only surpassed that, but doubled down on racism, saying that she was a racist, but they're the racists. I need you to take a listen to this, and then we're going to have a short discussion.
To quote Zora Neale Hurston, not all skin folk are kinfolk. Nikki Haley instead is the Dinesh D'Souza of Candace Owens. She's the alpha Karen with brown skin. And for white supremacists and racists, she's the perfect Manchurian candidate. And instead of applauding her, I am just disgusted by people like Nikki Haley who know better, whose parents were the beneficiaries, as Asha said, of the 1965 Immigration Nationality Act, which passed thanks to those original BLM protesters and the Civil Rights Act. Her father came here because he was a professor. He taught at a historically black college in South Carolina. That's how she became the proud American that she is. And yet, what does she do? Like all these model minorities, which, by the way, is a strategy of white supremacy to use Asians in particular as a cudgel against black folks. Instead of pulling us up from the bootstraps and pulling others from the bootstrap, we're taught to take your boot and put it on the neck of poor browns, immigrants, refugees, and black folks. And that's what she did in her ad. So I see her and I feel sad, Mehdi, because she uses her brown skin as a weapon against poor black folks and poor brown folks. And she uses her brown skin to launder white supremacist talking points. And the reason why I feel sad, because no matter what she does, Mehdi, it'll never be enough.
I am so disgusted with this. I don't understand these. Well, first of all, Mehdi Hassan should have thrown that guy's ass off of his show. And secondly, Nikki Haley is a great example of an American woman and from an immigrant family who has done extraordinarily well in our nation. I look at her and I think to myself, all of the work that my mother did when she came to this country and all of the sacrifices she made so that I can have an education and the life that I have. I would not be who I am without my mother. That is a fact. And I'm positive that Nikki Haley, who I admire very much, and I think it's extraordinary and fantastic that she is running for the presidency, that she is a true example of the American dream, that these imbecile racists at MSNBC could make such statements sickens me. And by the way, BLM did not exist in the 1960s. I'm so sorry. And another thing that really is distressing for me is the fact that they act as if anybody outside of the Democratic Party, Mehdi Hasan and his guests, anybody outside of the Democratic Party who happens to be, East Asian or African descent, or anybody who is not Caucasian, is not allowed to have a mind of their own. They have to be a Democrat. That is exactly what Mehdi Hasan and his guests are saying. Like, once you have a mind of your own and you can think for yourself and you don't want to be controlled by the leftist Marxist agenda and you believe in free enterprise and capitalism and the future of this great nation, which, by the way, elected Barack Obama to the presidency, and which, by the way, is a nation that fights against, sure, do we have a history? Yeah, sure. Are there racists in America? Yeah, sure. And MSNBC is one of them. They're one of them. That is a fact. Mehdi Hasan and all of his guests should no longer be allowed on that show. But you know what? In a way, I'm grateful because it exposes them for who they are. Nikki Haley was the U.S. ambassador to the United Nations, and her work was exemplary at the United Nations. Exemplary. And her ability to delineate, between national interests and foreign policy interests is extraordinary. She's able to look at both of these issues. She's not just focused on one. I think we're blessed to have her running for office. I feel grateful that she is thrown her name into the hat. The more, the better. The American people have the right to make these decisions. But as the daughter of an immigrant mother from Cuba and someone who has I've seen it and felt racism in my life. I've seen it with my mother. My mother was darker than me. She had an accent. My great-great-grandmother was from West Africa. My grandmother and my mom, you could see it in some of them. I in fact, I'm going to put pictures up one day because it's so cool. It's like the 1950s. And, even in the United States then in the 1950s, you really didn't see a lot of mixing, like people hanging out together at parties and stuff, unless it was like the nightclubs and stuff. But in Cuba, it was very common even back then. And I have these great pictures of my mom at these parties with her friends and, in the 1950s and even the late 1940s. And, it was just very mixed. And, in my family, there was never an issue with that. My mom always believed I could be anything I wanted. I was never a victim. She was never a victim. She was always an American. And I can't say what it's like to walk in, everybody's shoes. We don't know. I mean, we can empathize, we can imagine, but I can tell you this, that I have traveled the whole world and I have seen people in their darkest moments, and I've been there myself. And I believe that anybody can be anything if they work hard enough for it and given the opportunity to do so. And especially in the United States of America. And for any of you out there, or who are listening to me right now, if you're sitting there at home, for any of your children, if they believe the BS that they are being taught in school, that we are all victims and that the white man is hates all people of all color, and that we need to give handouts or reparations or anything. Like if the constant victimization of our society is what's destroying it. The only reason I believe, and the only way that we can be successful, and then I'll end it here, is we have to believe in ourselves. Don't worry about what the other people are saying. We have to fight for our country. We have to fight for our fundamental values. We have to believe that our founding fathers, what they established. Who cares what these people, these racists are saying? They're the racists. Nikki Haley is a great example of an American woman who came from a family of immigrants. We are all immigrants, and we all came from one place or another, and we all struggled, no matter what color of skin we had, no matter if we're white, no matter if we're Asian, no matter where we came from, And that's what makes America so great, is that we all have the opportunity to make something out of ourselves and out of our lives. And even when our family members had to toil hard, whether it was working in a factory or whether sacrificing so much, and whether it's the history of our nation that we're not so proud of, we found a way to come out of it, and we find a way to come out of it together. Folks, don't let these people divide us any longer. We are one nation, we are one country, and we all bleed the same blood, right? We're all fighting for each other, and we're all fighting for a better future. Thank you so much for being a part of the Sara Carter Show. Thank you so much for everything that you do. And thank you so much for your history and for your families and for the future of this country. Remember, you can follow me on Twitter at Sara Carter DC, on Instagram at SCarterDC, and on Truth at Sara Carter Official. God bless you. God bless our great nation. And God bless the great state of Texas.